The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his dress blue uniform one final time. The crisp November air bit at his face, but years of military training had taught him to ignore such minor discomforts. Today marked the beginning of what would be the most important assignment of his 8-year career in the United States Marine Corps. Marcus had been selected from hundreds of candidates to serve as part of the ceremonial guard during the state visit of the American president to the United Kingdom. It was an honor that carried weight far beyond the pressed uniform and polished brass buttons he wore. His commanding officer had made it clear that this assignment could define the trajectory of his military career, and Marcus understood the gravity of representing his country on foreign soil. Standing at attention in the palace courtyard, Marcus allowed his mind to wander briefly to the journey that had brought him here. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, he had always dreamed of serving his country with distinction. His father, a Vietnam veteran, had instilled in him the values of duty, honor, and sacrifice from an early age. The military had given Marcus purpose, discipline, and a sense of belonging he had never found elsewhere. The sound of approaching footsteps on the cobblestones drew Marcus back to the present moment. A formation of British Royal Guards emerged from the palace's east wing, their iconic red tunics and bearskin hats creating an impressive display of centuries-old tradition. Marcus had studied the history and customs of the Royal Guard extensively in preparation for this assignment, but seeing them in person was something entirely different. Among the guards, one figure immediately caught Marcus's attention. She moved with the same precision and bearing as her male counterparts, but there was something distinctly graceful about her stride. Her uniform fit perfectly, and despite the traditional bearskin hat that obscured much of her face, Marcus could see the determined set of her jaw and the alertness in her eyes. Guardsman Eleanor Whitfield had been serving in Her Majesty's Royal Guard for 3 years. A relatively short time by the standards of the elite unit, but long enough to have proven herself among the most dedicated and skilled members of the regiment. She had fought hard to earn her position, overcoming not only the rigorous physical and mental demands of the training, but also the skepticism of those who questioned whether women belonged in such a traditional and prestigious role. Eleanor's path to the Royal Guard had been anything but conventional. Born into a working-class family in Manchester, she had excelled in academics and athletics throughout her school years. Her parents had hoped she would pursue a career in teaching or nursing, but Eleanor had always been drawn to something more challenging, something that would push her to her absolute limits. The decision to join the military had not been easy for her family to accept. Her mother had worried about the dangers and hardships Eleanor would face, while her father had struggled to understand why his daughter would choose such a difficult path when she had so many other options available to her. But Eleanor had been determined to prove that she could succeed in any environment, regardless of the obstacles placed before her. As the British and American ceremonial guards took their positions for the morning's rehearsal, Eleanor found herself directly across from the American Marine she had noticed earlier. Even at a distance of several meters, she could sense his focus and professionalism. There was something about his bearing that commanded respect, and she found herself curious about the man behind the uniform. The rehearsal began with a series of synchronized movements designed to showcase the precision and discipline of both military units. Marcus executed each command with the mechanical perfection that had been drilled into him through countless hours of practice, but he found his attention repeatedly drawn to the British guardswoman across from him. Eleanor moved with a fluidity that impressed Marcus. Every step, every turn, every gesture was executed with a precision that spoke of countless hours of dedication and training. He had served alongside many exceptional soldiers during his career, but there was something about Eleanor's presence that set her apart from the rest. The commanding officers from both nations observed the rehearsal with critical eyes, noting every detail and making adjustments where necessary. The upcoming ceremony would be watched by millions of people around the world, and there was no room for error. The reputation of both military forces depended on flawless execution. During a brief break in the rehearsal, Marcus found himself standing near Eleanor as they waited for further instructions. The proximity allowed him to see her more clearly for the first time. Beneath the formal military bearing, he could see intelligent green eyes and a face that spoke of determination and strength. There were subtle signs of the challenges she had faced in earning her position, a certain hardness around the edges that spoke of battles fought and won. Eleanor, for her part, was equally intrigued by the American Marine standing beside her. She had worked with international military personnel before, but there was something different about Marcus. His presence was commanding without being arrogant, confident without being boastful. She could sense a depth of character that went beyond the surface-level professionalism expected in their roles. The brief moment of proximity ended when the commanding officers called them back into formation, but both Marcus and Eleanor found their thoughts lingering on the encounter. There had been something electric about that moment of shared space, something that neither of them could easily dismiss or explain. As the rehearsal continued, both soldiers threw themselves into their duties with renewed focus, but there remained an undercurrent of awareness between them. Marcus found himself unconsciously timing his movements to match Eleanor's rhythm, while Eleanor discovered herself glancing in Marcus's direction whenever the formation allowed. The morning rehearsal concluded with a final inspection by the commanding officers from both nations. Both Marcus and Eleanor passed with flying colors, their uniforms immaculate, and their bearing beyond reproach. As the formation was dismissed, they found themselves walking in the same direction toward the palace's west wing. The corridor was long and lined with portraits of British royalty spanning centuries. The weight of history seemed to press down upon them as they walked in comfortable silence. Neither spoke, but both were acutely aware of the other's presence. It was Eleanor who finally broke the silence. "Your unit's precision is quite impressive," she said, her voice carrying the crisp tones of her Manchester upbringing. "We don't often have the opportunity to work alongside American forces in this capacity." Marcus turned to look at her, grateful for the opening to conversation. "The honor is ours," he replied. "The reputation of the Royal Guard precedes itself. Your tradition and discipline are legendary among military personnel worldwide." Eleanor smiled slightly at the compliment, though she was careful to maintain the professional demeanor required by their surroundings. "Tradition can be both a blessing and a burden," she observed. "It provides structure and purpose, but it can also create expectations that are difficult to meet." Marcus nodded in understanding. He had felt the weight of military tradition throughout his own career, the constant pressure to live up to the standards set by generations of Marines who had come before him. "The key is finding your own place within that tradition," he said, "making it your own while still honoring what came before." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Eleanor's commanding officer, Colonel Hartwell, a stern man in his 50s who had served with distinction in multiple conflicts. His expression was neutral, but watchful as he approached the pair. "Guardsman Whitfield," he said in clipped tones, "you're needed in the briefing room for final preparations. The ceremony is tomorrow, and every detail must be perfect." Eleanor straightened to attention immediately. "Yes, sir," she replied crisply. Colonel Hartwell's gaze shifted to Marcus, and he nodded respectfully. "Staff Sergeant Thompson, I trust everything is proceeding according to plan with your preparations?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, matching Eleanor's formal tone. "My unit is ready to execute the ceremony flawlessly." The colonel studied them both for a moment longer before nodding curtly and walking away. Eleanor and Marcus remained at attention until he was out of sight, then relaxed slightly. "Duty calls," Eleanor said with a rueful smile. "Perhaps we'll have the opportunity to continue our conversation after tomorrow's ceremony." Marcus watched her walk away, noting the confident stride and straight shoulders that marked her as a consummate professional. Something about their brief interaction had left him wanting to know more about the woman behind the uniform. There was an intelligence and depth to Eleanor that intrigued him, and he found himself looking forward to seeing her again. That evening, as Marcus prepared for sleep in his assigned quarters within the palace, his thoughts kept returning to his encounter with Eleanor. He had served alongside many outstanding soldiers during his career, both male and female, but there had been something different about his interaction with the British guardswoman. Perhaps it was the setting, the weight of history and tradition that surrounded them, or perhaps it was something more personal. Eleanor, in her own quarters on the opposite side of the palace, found herself in a similar state of mind. She had always prided herself on her ability to maintain focus and discipline regardless of circumstances, but the American Marine had managed to penetrate her professional detachment in a way that both surprised and concerned her. The upcoming ceremony represented the culmination of months of preparation and training. There would be no room for distraction or personal considerations. Eleanor had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to allow anything to compromise her performance. Yet, as she reviewed the ceremonial procedures one final time before sleep, she found her thoughts drifting to Marcus Thompson and the brief but meaningful connection they had shared. The next morning would bring the state ceremony that would test both of their professional abilities and personal discipline. Neither Marcus nor Eleanor could have predicted that this assignment would become something far more significant than just another duty to perform. The stage was set for a moment that would change both of their lives forever, though they had no way of knowing it yet. As midnight approached and the palace settled into quiet, both soldiers lay in their respective quarters, thinking about the challenges and opportunities that tomorrow would bring. They were both dedicated professionals who had devoted their lives to serving their countries with honor and distinction. Neither expected that their paths would become so fundamentally intertwined in the days to come. The ceremony would be flawless, their performance beyond reproach, but it would also mark the beginning of something neither had anticipated when they first put on their uniforms that morning. Sometimes the most important moments in life come when we least expect them, disguised as ordinary duty and routine responsibility. Tomorrow would bring their moment of truth, and with it, the beginning of a story that would challenge everything they thought they knew about duty, honor, and the human heart. The stage was set, the players in position, and destiny was about to unfold in the most unexpected of ways. The dawn of the ceremony day broke crisp and clear over London, with the kind of perfect weather that seemed ordained for state occasions. Marcus had been awake since 4 a.m, running through his final preparations with a methodical precision that had become second nature during his years of service. His dress blue uniform hung perfectly pressed on its hanger, every button polished to a mirror shine, every crease sharp enough to cut paper. In the bathroom mirror, Marcus studied his reflection with the critical eye of a soldier who understood that appearance was part of performance. His dark hair was trimmed to regulation length, his face clean-shaven and alert despite the early hour. At 26, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had proven himself in challenging situations. Yet there remained a hint of the small-town Ohio boy who had first enlisted 8 years ago with dreams of serving something greater than himself. Across the palace, Eleanor was engaged in her own morning ritual. She had been up even earlier than Marcus, using the quiet pre-dawn hours to review every aspect of the day's ceremonial procedures. Her red tunic hung beside her bearskin hat, both items representing centuries of British military tradition that she had the honor and responsibility of upholding. Eleanor's reflection showed a face that had been shaped by 3 years of rigorous military service. At 24, she possessed a maturity and determination that spoke of someone who had fought for every opportunity she had received. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation style that would fit perfectly beneath her ceremonial hat, and her green eyes held the focused intensity of someone who never took her responsibilities lightly. The palace was already bustling with activity as staff members, security personnel, and protocol officers made their final preparations for the arrival of the American president and the formal ceremony that would follow. The weight of international attention added an extra layer of pressure to an event that was already demanding in its complexity and precision requirements. Marcus joined his fellow Marines in the assembly area designated for American personnel. Captain Rodriguez, their commanding officer, conducted a final inspection of each soldier's uniform and bearing. The captain was a veteran of multiple deployments who had specifically requested Marcus for this assignment based on his exemplary service record and ability to perform under pressure. "Gentlemen," Captain Rodriguez addressed the formation, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Today, you represent not only the United States Marine Corps, but the entire American military establishment. Every eye will be upon us, every movement scrutinized. I expect nothing less than perfection from each of you." The Marines responded with a crisp aura that echoed through the stone corridors of the palace. Marcus felt the familiar surge of pride and determination that came with such moments. This was why he had chosen the military life, for the opportunity to serve his country on the world stage and to be part of something larger than himself. Meanwhile, Eleanor stood with her fellow guards as Colonel Hartwell delivered his own pre-ceremony address. The British officer's words carried the weight of tradition that stretched back through generations of soldiers who had performed similar duties in service of the crown. "Today, we uphold a tradition that has been maintained through wars, peace, and social change," the colonel said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "The eyes of the world will be upon us, but more importantly, we carry the trust and respect that our predecessors have earned through their own dedication and sacrifice. I know each of you will honor that legacy." Eleanor felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came with such moments of responsibility. She had worked harder than most of her peers to earn her place in this formation, and she was determined to prove that the faith placed in her was well-founded. The Royal Guard represented the pinnacle of British military tradition, and she was proud to be part of that legacy. As the ceremony hour approached, both the American and British formations moved into position in the palace's grand courtyard. The space had been transformed for the occasion, with viewing stands for dignitaries and media representatives arranged around the perimeter. The morning sun cast dramatic shadows across the ancient stones, creating a backdrop that perfectly captured the grandeur and solemnity of the event. Marcus took his position in the American formation, directly across the courtyard from where Eleanor stood with her fellow guards. Even at a distance, he could see her perfect posture and the unwavering focus that marked her as a true professional. Something about her presence continued to draw his attention, though he was careful to maintain the discipline required by the occasion. Eleanor, for her part, found herself equally aware of Marcus's position across the courtyard. There was something about his bearing that set him apart from his fellow Marines, a quiet confidence that spoke of genuine character rather than mere training. She had learned to read people quickly during her military service, and everything about the American Marines suggested someone who could be trusted and respected. The sound of approaching motorcycles and vehicles signaled the arrival of the presidential convoy. A hush fell over the assembled crowd as the ceremony officially began. Both Marcus and Eleanor straightened to their most perfect attention, their personal thoughts temporarily set aside in favor of the duty they had sworn to uphold. The American president emerged from his armored vehicle with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to such formal occasions. He was accompanied by key members of his administration and security detail, all moving with the choreographed precision that marked high-level diplomatic events. The president's presence added an extra dimension of importance to the ceremony, representing as it did the alliance between two nations with a shared history and common values. From the palace emerged members of the British royal family, their own arrival marking the formal beginning of the ceremonial proceedings. The pageantry and protocol that followed were the result of centuries of refinement, each gesture and movement carrying symbolic meaning that reached far beyond the immediate moment. Marcus executed each required movement with mechanical precision, his training taking over as he became part of the larger ceremonial machine. Yet even as he performed his duties flawlessly, part of his attention remained focused on Eleanor's position across the courtyard. There was something almost magnetic about her presence that he found difficult to ignore. Eleanor was experiencing similar feelings as she maintained her position in the British formation. Her training had taught her to compartmentalize her thoughts during such moments, but the American Marine's presence seemed to penetrate her professional focus in unexpected ways. She found herself consciously avoiding looking in his direction, afraid that any break in her concentration might be noticed by her superiors. The ceremony proceeded through its carefully choreographed stages, with speeches, musical performances, and formal presentations marking the key moments. Both Marcus and Eleanor performed their roles flawlessly, their months of preparation evident in every movement and gesture. The international media captured every moment, transmitting images of the event to audiences around the world. As the formal portion of the ceremony concluded, there came a moment of transition as the various formations began to move into new positions for the concluding elements of the program. It was during this movement that fate intervened in a way that neither Marcus nor Eleanor could have anticipated. A sudden gust of November wind caught Eleanor's bearskin hat just as she was executing a turn in formation. The hat tilted precariously, threatening to fall, and create exactly the kind of embarrassing incident that could mar an otherwise perfect ceremony. Without thinking, Eleanor reached up to steady the hat, but the movement caused her to lose her balance slightly on the uneven cobblestones. Marcus saw what was happening before anyone else did. His marine training had taught him to be constantly aware of his surroundings and to react quickly to unexpected situations. Without hesitation, he broke from his own formation position and stepped forward, arriving at Eleanor's side just as she began to stumble. His strong hands caught her arms, steadying her before she could fall. For a moment that seemed to stretch far longer than the few seconds it actually lasted, Marcus and Eleanor found themselves face to face, their eyes meeting in a moment of intense connection that transcended the formal setting around them. Eleanor's green eyes widened with surprise, and something else that she couldn't immediately identify. Marcus's brown eyes held a warmth and concern that went far beyond mere duty or protocol. In that suspended moment, with hundreds of people watching and cameras recording, they experienced a connection that seemed to exist outside of time and circumstance. The professional in both of them quickly reasserted itself, and Eleanor straightened with Marcus's assistance, her hat properly positioned and her bearing restored to its previous perfection. Marcus stepped back into his own formation position, his face maintaining the neutral expression required by the occasion. To the casual observer, nothing more than a minor adjustment had occurred. But both Marcus and Eleanor knew that something profound had just happened between them. The brief physical contact and eye contact had created a spark of connection that neither had expected or prepared for. Eleanor's heart was beating faster than usual, and she could feel a flush of warmth in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the November weather. Marcus felt similarly affected by the encounter. His hands still tingled from the brief contact with Eleanor's arms, and the memory of looking into her eyes at such close range was already burned into his memory. He had acted instinctively to help her, but the moment had become something much more significant than a simple gesture of assistance. The remainder of the ceremony passed in a blur for both of them. They maintained their professional demeanor and executed their duties without fault, but their thoughts kept returning to those few seconds of connection. Neither could shake the feeling that something important had just begun, though neither was entirely sure what it might mean. As the formal ceremonies concluded and the various formations began to disperse, Marcus found himself looking for an opportunity to speak with Eleanor again. The brief encounter had left him wanting to know more about the woman behind the uniform, to understand the person who had managed to affect him so profoundly in such a short time. Eleanor was experiencing similar feelings as she prepared to return to her quarters. The American Marine had shown her a kindness and quick thinking that had saved her from potential embarrassment. But more than that, there had been something in his eyes during their moment of contact that suggested depths of character worth exploring. The opportunity for further interaction came sooner than either had expected. As the various personnel involved in the ceremony were being debriefed and dismissed, both Marcus and Eleanor found themselves assigned to escort duties for the remainder of the presidential visit. They would be working in close proximity for the next several days, a prospect that both excited and concerned them. Colonel Hartwell approached Eleanor as she prepared to leave the courtyard. "Guardsman Whitfield," he said, his tone carrying its usual authority. "You'll be assigned to the inner security detail for the remainder of the visit. I trust your performance today was merely a minor adjustment and not indicative of any larger issues." Eleanor straightened to full attention. "No, sir. Simply a matter of weather and equipment, sir. It won't happen again." The colonel studied her for a moment before nodding. "See that it doesn't. Your professionalism reflects on the entire regiment." His gaze shifted slightly. "I noticed the quick thinking of the American Marine in assisting you. You might consider expressing appropriate gratitude when the opportunity arises." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm again at the suggestion, but she maintained her composure. "Yes, sir. I'll find an appropriate moment to do so." Captain Rodriguez had delivered similar instructions to Marcus, assigning him to the same security detail that would work closely with the British Guard for the remainder of the visit. As he briefed Marcus on the assignment, he made a point of commending the Marines' quick thinking and professionalism in assisting the British Guardswoman. That kind of quick thinking and international cooperation is exactly what this assignment is about, Thompson, the captain, said. "You represented yourself and the Corps well today." Marcus accepted the praise with appropriate humility, but his thoughts were more focused on the implications of the extended assignment. Working closely with Eleanor over the next several days would give them opportunities to interact that wouldn't have existed otherwise. He found himself looking forward to those interactions with an anticipation that surprised him. As the day wound down and both soldiers prepared for their evening duties, they carried with them the memory of their brief but meaningful encounter. Neither could have predicted that morning that a simple gust of wind would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and their futures. The stage was set for the deeper connection that would develop over the coming days, built on a foundation of mutual respect and the kind of instant recognition that sometimes occurs between kindred spirits. Their moment of eye contact had lasted only seconds, but its impact would reverberate through both of their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. Tonight, they would sleep with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new opportunities for connection, new chances to explore the unexpected feelings that had been awakened by their brief encounter. The ceremony had been a success, their duties fulfilled with honor, but it had also marked the beginning of something entirely unexpected and potentially life-changing for both of them. The morning after the ceremony dawned with a gentle rain that created silver rivulets across the palace windows. Marcus stood at his assigned post in the east corridor, watching the gray London sky while maintaining the vigilant awareness that his security duties required. The events of the previous day felt both distant and immediate, as if they had happened in another lifetime, yet remained vividly present in his memory. Eleanor approached from the north wing, her footsteps echoing softly on the marble floors as she made her way to her own security position. She wore the standard duty uniform today, rather than the ceremonial dress from yesterday, but she carried herself with the same poise and confidence that had first caught Marcus's attention. As she drew nearer, both soldiers felt the subtle tension that had existed between them since their brief encounter. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," Eleanor said formally as she passed his position. Her voice carried the proper military courtesy, but there was something in her tone that suggested awareness of their shared experience. "Guardsman Whitfield," Marcus replied with equal formality. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, both remembered the intensity of their connection during yesterday's ceremony. The memory hung between them like an unspoken question, creating an atmosphere of anticipation and uncertainty. The security briefing that followed brought them into the same room with a dozen other military personnel from both nations. Colonel Hartwell and Captain Rodriguez outlined the day's schedule, which would involve multiple movements between palace locations as the presidential visit continued with meetings, tours, and formal receptions. Marcus found himself positioned 2 seats away from Eleanor during the briefing, close enough to catch the subtle scent of her perfume and to notice the way she took careful notes on every detail being discussed. Her attention to detail and obvious dedication to her duties impressed him, reinforcing his initial assessment that she was someone who took her responsibilities seriously. Eleanor was equally aware of Marcus's presence beside her. She could sense his focused attention during the briefing and noticed the way he asked thoughtful questions about security protocols and coordination procedures. His professionalism and obvious competence made her feel both comfortable and slightly nervous about the day ahead. After the briefing concluded, both soldiers found themselves assigned to the same sector of the palace for the morning shift. They would be working within sight of each other, but maintaining separate positions, an arrangement that allowed for casual conversation while still fulfilling their security responsibilities. The first hour passed in comfortable silence as they settled into their respective positions. Marcus stood near the entrance to the blue drawing room, where several diplomatic meetings would take place throughout the day. Eleanor was positioned at the intersection of 2 corridors that provided access to the same area, giving her oversight of multiple approaches to the secured zone. It was Eleanor who first broke the silence between them. "I wanted to thank you properly for yesterday," she said, keeping her voice low and professional. "Your quick thinking saved me from what could have been a very embarrassing situation." Marcus turned slightly to face her while maintaining his watch on the corridor. "Any soldier would have done the same," he replied modestly. "We all look out for each other in situations like that." Eleanor smiled slightly at his response. "Perhaps, but not everyone would have reacted so quickly or with such discretion. You made it look like nothing more than a routine adjustment." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of palace staff preparing the rooms for the morning's meetings. Both soldiers straightened to full attention as protocol required, but the brief exchange had established a foundation for further interaction throughout the day. As the morning progressed, Marcus and Eleanor found opportunities for short conversations during quiet moments between official activities. They discussed their respective training experiences, comparing the similarities and differences between Marine Corps and British Army methods. Eleanor was fascinated by Marcus's descriptions of American military culture, while Marcus found himself intrigued by Eleanor's insights into British military traditions. The physical training was probably the hardest part, Eleanor admitted during one of their conversations. "Not just because of the demands, but because I knew I had to be better than average to prove I belonged there." Marcus nodded in understanding. "I imagine you faced some skepticism along the way. The military can be slow to change, even when the change makes perfect sense." Eleanor appreciated his understanding of the challenges she had faced. Too many people, including some fellow soldiers, had assumed her path had been easier because of changing attitudes toward women in combat roles. Marcus seemed to recognize that breaking new ground in any military context required exceptional dedication and performance. Their duties brought them into closer proximity during the afternoon shift, when they were both assigned to the inner security perimeter for a formal reception being held in the palace's state dining room. The assignment required them to work in coordinated positions, maintaining communication while covering different angles of approach to the secured area. The coordination required them to speak more frequently and to develop a working relationship that went beyond mere courtesy. Marcus found himself impressed by Eleanor's tactical thinking and her ability to anticipate potential security concerns before they became issues. Eleanor discovered that Marcus possessed an intuitive understanding of crowd dynamics and threat assessment that made him an excellent partner for such assignments. During a brief lull in activity, Eleanor asked Marcus about his background and what had led him to choose a military career. His answer revealed more about his character than she had expected to learn during a routine security assignment. "My father served in Vietnam," Marcus explained, his voice taking on a more personal tone. He never talked much about his experiences, but I could see how his service had shaped him. He taught me about duty and sacrifice, but also about the importance of serving something larger than yourself. Eleanor listened carefully, recognizing the deep respect and affection in Marcus's voice when he spoke about his father. "Is he still alive?" she asked gently. Marcus's expression grew more serious. "He passed away 2 years ago. Cancer, probably related to chemical exposure during his deployment. But he lived long enough to see me make sergeant, and I know he was proud of that." Eleanor felt a wave of sympathy for the loss Marcus had experienced, but also admiration for the way he had honored his father's legacy through his own service. "He will be proud of what you're doing here," she said, "representing your country with such distinction." Marcus appreciated her words more than he had expected to. Something about Eleanor's presence made it easy to share personal thoughts and feelings that he normally kept private. There was a genuineness about her that encouraged honesty and openness. Eleanor found herself sharing more about her own background as well. She told Marcus about growing up in Manchester, about parents who had worked hard to provide opportunities for their children, and about the dreams that had led her to choose a path so different from what her family had envisioned for her. "My mother still worries constantly," Eleanor admitted with a slight laugh. "She reads every news story about military activities and calls to make sure I'm safe. She doesn't understand why I chose this life when I had other options available." Marcus smiled at the image of Eleanor's worried mother. "Does she understand it better now that she's seen what you've accomplished?" Eleanor considered the question thoughtfully. "I think she's beginning to. When I was selected for the Royal Guard, she actually started bragging about it to her friends. She may not understand my choices, but she's proud of what I've achieved." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the presidential party for the afternoon reception. Both soldiers immediately shifted into their professional mode, maintaining their positions while carefully monitoring the crowd of dignitaries and staff members who filled the state dining room. The reception proceeded smoothly, with both Marcus and Eleanor performing their duties with the kind of seamless coordination that marked experienced security personnel. They communicated through subtle gestures and brief radio transmissions, maintaining awareness of each other's position while focusing on their respective areas of responsibility. During the event, Marcus noticed how Eleanor interacted with other palace staff and security personnel. She was respectful and professional with everyone, but there was a warmth in her manner that suggested genuine care for the people around her. Her colleagues clearly respected her competence and trusted her judgment, evidence of the reputation she had built during her time with the Royal Guard. Eleanor observed similar qualities in Marcus as he coordinated with American security personnel and palace staff. His leadership style was confident but not domineering, and he had a way of making others feel valued and respected regardless of their rank or position. These were qualities that went beyond mere training and spoke to fundamental aspects of his character. As the reception concluded and the various security details began to stand down from their heightened alert status, Marcus and Eleanor found themselves walking together toward the security debriefing area. The day's duties were nearly complete, but both felt reluctant to see their time together come to an end. "Would you like to get some coffee?" Marcus asked as they reached the intersection where their paths would normally diverge. "I mean, if you don't have other obligations. I know there's a cafe near the staff quarters that stays open late." Eleanor felt a flutter of nervousness at the invitation, but also genuine pleasure at the prospect of continuing their conversation in a more relaxed setting. "I'd like that," she replied. "Let me just check in with my duty officer, and I'll meet you there in 15 minutes. The cafe Marcus had suggested was a small, quiet place frequented primarily by palace staff and security personnel. It provided a neutral environment where military personnel from both nations could relax and socialize without the formal constraints that govern their on-duty interactions. Eleanor arrived to find Marcus already seated at a corner table, 2 cups of coffee waiting. He stood as she approached, a gesture of courtesy that she found both charming and characteristic of his overall manner. They settled into conversation with the ease of people who had been working together all day, but there was now a personal dimension to their interaction that hadn't existed during their official duties. "Tell me about Ohio," Eleanor said, genuinely curious about Marcus's background. "I've never been to that part of America, but I've always been interested in what small-town life is like there." Marcus described his hometown with obvious affection, painting a picture of Friday night football games, summer festivals, and the kind of close-knit community where everyone knew their neighbors. Eleanor found herself charmed by his descriptions and impressed by the values that had shaped his upbringing. "It sounds like the kind of place where people take care of each other," Eleanor observed. "They do," Marcus agreed. "That's probably where I learned that service is about more than just following orders. It's about being part of something that matters, something that makes a difference in people's lives." Eleanor shared her own stories about Manchester, describing the industrial heritage and working-class pride that had shaped her family's values. Marcus was struck by the similarities between their backgrounds, despite the obvious differences in culture and geography. Both had been raised with strong values about duty, hard work, and taking care of others. Their conversation continued for more than an hour, touching on topics ranging from their military experiences to their hopes and dreams for the future. Marcus learned that Eleanor was interested in eventually pursuing officer training and possibly specializing in international security cooperation. Eleanor discovered that Marcus had been considering whether to make the military a career or to eventually transition to civilian law enforcement. As their coffee grew cold and the cafe began to empty around them, both realized that they had been talking with the kind of easy intimacy that usually took much longer to develop between people. There was something about their connection that seemed to transcend the normal barriers of nationality, military protocol, and personal reserve. "I should probably get some sleep," Eleanor finally said, though her tone suggested reluctance to end the evening. "Tomorrow promises to be another long day." Marcus nodded, understanding the practical necessities, but feeling the same reluctance. "Thank you for the conversation," he said, "and for sharing your coffee time with me. I've really enjoyed getting to know you better." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I've enjoyed it too," she replied honestly. "Perhaps we can do this again before your assignment here is finished." They walked together partway back to their respective quarters, maintaining the careful distance required by military protocol, while both secretly wishing they could extend their time together. When they finally parted ways at the corridor intersection, both carried with them the memory of an evening that had deepened their connection in ways neither had fully anticipated. Marcus lay awake that night thinking about Eleanor's laugh, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something that interested her, and the genuine warmth she had shown throughout their conversation. He was beginning to realize that his feelings for her were developing beyond mere professional admiration or casual attraction. Eleanor, in her own quarters, found herself replaying their entire conversation, remembering the thoughtful way Marcus had listened to her stories and the respect he had shown for her experiences and opinions. She was attracted to his character as much as his physical presence, drawn to the depth and authenticity she sensed beneath his professional exterior. Neither slept easily that night, both wondering what the remaining days of the presidential visit might bring and whether the connection they were developing could survive beyond the unique circumstances that had brought them together. They were both experienced enough to understand the complications that personal relationships could create in military environments, but they were also beginning to realize that some connections are too powerful to ignore or dismiss. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities for them to work together, to learn more about each other, and to explore the feelings that were growing stronger with each passing hour. The foundation had been laid for something deeper and more meaningful than either had expected when they first put on their uniforms for what they had assumed would be just another assignment. The third day of the presidential visit brought an unexpected crisis that would test both Marcus and Eleanor in ways they had never anticipated. The morning began routinely enough, with both soldiers taking their assigned positions for what was scheduled to be a relatively quiet day of diplomatic meetings and cultural events. The rain had stopped, leaving London crisp and clear under a pale November sky. Marcus was positioned in the green drawing room, where a series of bilateral meetings between American and British officials would take place throughout the morning. Eleanor had been assigned to coordinate security for the adjacent Queen's Gallery, where a special exhibition was being prepared for the president's viewing later in the day. Their positions kept them in close proximity while maintaining the professional separation that their duties required. The first indication that something was wrong came at approximately 10:30 in the morning, when Colonel Hartwell's voice crackled through the security communication system with an urgency that immediately caught everyone's attention. All stations, we have a credible security threat. Palace is moving to elevated alert status effective immediately. Prepare for possible evacuation protocols. Marcus felt his training take over as adrenaline flooded his system. His eyes immediately swept the room where he stood, automatically cataloging exits, potential threats, and the positions of all personnel in his immediate vicinity. Through the doorway connecting his position to Eleanor's area, he could see her executing similar assessment procedures with the crisp efficiency of someone whose training had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. The details of the threat remained unclear, but the response was swift and coordinated. Additional security personnel appeared in the corridors within minutes, while palace staff began implementing evacuation procedures for non-essential personnel. The presidential party was moved to a secure location within the palace, while British and American security forces worked together to assess and neutralize whatever danger had been identified. Eleanor's section of the palace became a critical checkpoint as security teams worked to establish a secure perimeter around the threatened area. Her position at the intersection of two major corridors made her a key coordinator for personnel movement and communication between different security units. Marcus found himself reassigned to support Eleanor's position when it became clear that her area would be handling increased traffic from multiple security agencies. As he arrived to take up his new position, their eyes met briefly, and he could see the same focused intensity that he felt reflected in her expression. This was why they had trained, why they had chosen to serve. Everything else fell away in the face of immediate duty and responsibility. Situation report? Marcus asked Eleanor in the clipped, professional tone that emergency situations required. Possible explosive device reported in the East Wing library. Eleanor replied without taking her eyes off the corridor she was monitoring. Bomb disposal team is en route. We're maintaining containment and coordinating evacuation of adjacent areas. Marcus nodded, immediately understanding his role in the developing situation. They worked together with the seamless coordination of experienced professionals, managing the flow of personnel while maintaining communication with multiple command centers. Their personal feelings for each other became completely secondary to the immediate demands of protecting the people under their care. The next 2 hours tested every aspect of their training and experience. Security personnel from multiple agencies moved through their checkpoint, while palace staff and diplomatic personnel were evacuated from potentially dangerous areas. Eleanor and Marcus managed the controlled chaos with calm efficiency, making split-second decisions about personnel movement while maintaining constant communication with their respective command structures. The suspected device turned out to be a false alarm, a maintenance worker's toolbox that had been misidentified by an overly cautious security sweep. But the response had been genuine, and both Marcus and Eleanor had demonstrated the kind of professionalism and competence that marked elite military personnel. As the all-clear was finally given and normal operations began to resume, both soldiers felt the familiar exhaustion that follows high-stress situations. The adrenaline that had sustained them through the crisis was ebbing, leaving them drained but also exhilarated by their successful performance under pressure. "Well handled," Colonel Hartwell said as he stopped by their position during his post-crisis rounds. His words were directed to both soldiers, and his tone carried genuine approval. "Your coordination was textbook perfect. This is exactly the kind of international cooperation that makes these assignments successful." Captain Rodriguez expressed similar sentiments when he checked on Marcus's performance. "Outstanding work, Thompson. You adapted quickly to changed circumstances and demonstrated excellent judgment throughout the situation." As the palace slowly returned to normal operations, Marcus and Eleanor found themselves alone at their checkpoint for the first time since the crisis had begun. The intensity of working together under pressure had created an additional bond between them, deepening the connection that had been developing over the previous days. "That was well done," Marcus said, his voice carrying both professional respect and personal admiration. "You handled that coordination like someone with years of experience in crisis management." Eleanor felt a flush of pride at his praise, coming as it did from someone whose own performance had been exemplary throughout the emergency. "We work well together," she replied, the words carrying meaning beyond their immediate context. Marcus understood the deeper implication of her statement, and he felt the same recognition of their compatibility and mutual respect. They had been tested under pressure and had proven themselves not only individually competent, but also effective as a team. The experience had revealed qualities in each other that went beyond what they had observed during their previous interactions. The remainder of the day proceeded without incident, but the crisis had created a new dynamic in their relationship. They had seen each other perform under the most demanding circumstances possible, and both had been impressed by what they had witnessed. The professional respect that had been growing between them was now anchored in shared experience and proven competence. During their afternoon break, they found themselves sitting together in the staff area, comparing notes about the morning's events and discussing the lessons that could be learned from the experience. Their conversation was still primarily professional, but there was an undertone of personal connection that neither could ignore. "Have you been involved in many emergency situations like that?" Eleanor asked, curious about Marcus's background and experience. Marcus considered his answer carefully. "A few. Nothing quite like this setting, but similar in terms of the stakes and the need for immediate coordination." "What about you?" Eleanor shook her head. "This was my first real crisis situation in this role. I've had training scenarios and smaller incidents, but nothing with this level of complexity and international implications." Marcus was impressed by how well she had handled her first major crisis. The composure and decision-making ability she had demonstrated spoke of natural leadership qualities that went beyond mere training. "You wouldn't have known it was your first time," he said honestly. "Your performance was completely professional throughout." Eleanor appreciated his assessment more than she could easily express. Having someone of Marcus's obvious competence and experience validate her performance meant a great deal to her, both professionally and personally. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other personnel, but the moment of shared reflection had added another layer to their developing relationship. They had now seen each other at their best under the most challenging circumstances, and both had passed the test with distinction. The evening brought a formal reception that had been planned as part of the presidential visit, but now carried additional significance as a demonstration that the day's security concerns had been successfully resolved. Both Marcus and Eleanor were assigned to security duties for the event, positions that would keep them in close proximity while managing the complex logistics of protecting high-level officials in a social setting. The reception was held in the palace's magnificent ballroom, with dignitaries from both nations mingling in an atmosphere of controlled elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over guests in formal attire, while security personnel maintained discreet but vigilant oversight of the proceedings. Marcus and Eleanor worked together to coordinate coverage of the event, their earlier crisis experience having established a level of trust and communication that made their current assignment seem almost routine by comparison. They moved through their duties with practiced ease, maintaining awareness of potential threats while ensuring that the social aspects of the evening proceeded smoothly. During a quiet moment, when the reception was proceeding without requiring immediate attention, Eleanor found herself standing near Marcus as they both monitored the crowd from their respective positions. "This is quite different from this morning," she observed quietly, noting the contrast between the elegant social gathering and the high-stress emergency situation they had managed earlier. Marcus nodded, appreciating both the dramatic difference in atmosphere and the way they had successfully adapted to completely different types of challenges. "Same skills, different application," he replied. "But I'd rather be dealing with social protocol than potential explosives." Eleanor smiled at his comment, finding humor in the observation while also recognizing the underlying truth. Their profession required them to be ready for anything, to adapt quickly to changing circumstances while maintaining the same high standards of performance regardless of the situation. As the reception continued, both soldiers found themselves reflecting on the remarkable few days they had shared. What had begun as a routine ceremonial assignment had evolved into something much more complex and meaningful. They had worked together under pressure, shared personal stories and perspectives, and developed a connection that transcended the professional boundaries of their respective roles. The evening wound down with the same precision and protocol that had marked all aspects of the presidential visit. As guests departed and security teams began to stand down from their heightened alert status, Marcus and Eleanor found themselves walking together toward the debriefing area where their duties would officially conclude for the day. "Tomorrow is the last day of the visit," Eleanor observed, her tone carrying a note of regret that surprised her with its intensity. Marcus felt the same sense of impending loss at the thought of their assignment coming to an end. "It's gone by quickly," he replied, though the simple statement carried weight far beyond its surface meaning. They both understood what the conclusion of the presidential visit would mean for their relationship. Marcus would return to his regular duties and eventually to the United States, while Eleanor would resume her normal rotation with the Royal Guard. The unique circumstances that had brought them together and allowed their connection to develop would no longer exist. Neither spoke directly about these implications as they completed their evening duties and prepared to part ways for the night. But both were acutely aware that time was running short for whatever was developing between them, and both were beginning to wonder whether they were ready to let it simply end when their assignment concluded. The crisis they had successfully managed together had proven their professional compatibility and mutual respect. Their evening conversations had revealed personal connections and shared values that went far beyond their military roles. Now they faced the challenge of determining whether their feelings for each other were strong enough to overcome the practical obstacles that would face any attempt to maintain their relationship beyond this brief assignment. Marcus walked to his quarters that night, carrying the weight of these thoughts, and the growing realization that Eleanor had become much more important to him than he had initially recognized. The prospect of returning to his regular duties without her felt hollow in a way that surprised him with its intensity. Eleanor lay in her own bed that night, facing similar thoughts and feelings. The American Marine had become a significant presence in her life in just a few short days, and the thought of their assignment ending felt like losing something valuable before she had fully understood what she was gaining. Neither slept well that night, both wondering whether they had the courage to address the feelings that had developed between them and whether there might be some way to continue their connection beyond the artificial constraints of their current assignment. Tomorrow would be their last day together, and both were beginning to realize that they might regret forever anything left unsaid or unexplored. The stage was set for decisions that would determine whether their brief but intense connection would become a cherished memory or the beginning of something that could change both of their lives in fundamental ways. Time was running out, but the strength of their feelings was becoming impossible to ignore or dismiss. The final day of the presidential visit dawned with a sense of both completion and impending loss that weighed heavily on both Marcus and Eleanor as they prepared for their last day of joint duties. The London sky was overcast, matching the somber mood that had settled over them both despite their professional obligations to maintain focus and composure. Marcus stood before his mirror, adjusting his uniform with the same precision he had maintained throughout the assignment, but his thoughts were entirely occupied with the reality that this would be his last day working alongside Eleanor. In just a few hours, the presidential party would depart, the ceremonial duties would conclude, and he would begin preparing for his return to regular Marine Corps assignments. The thought left him feeling hollow and incomplete in a way he had never experienced before. Eleanor was experiencing similar emotions as she prepared for what would be their final day together. The past several days had revealed depths of feeling she had not expected to discover, and the prospect of returning to her normal routine without Marcus felt like losing a part of herself that she had only just begun to understand. She had built her military career on discipline and compartmentalization, but the connection she had developed with the American Marine seemed to transcend all of her usual emotional defenses. Their final duty assignment brought them together in the palace's grand foyer, where they would coordinate security for the departure ceremony that would mark the official conclusion of the state visit. It was fitting, in a way, that their last day would echo their first, with formal ceremonies and international protocol setting the stage for their interaction. The preparation for the departure ceremony required close coordination between British and American security personnel, giving Marcus and Eleanor numerous opportunities to work together throughout the morning. Their professional performance remained flawless, but both carried an undercurrent of sadness that their colleagues were professional enough not to comment upon, but perceptive enough to notice. Colonel Hartwell conducted his final briefing with characteristic precision, outlining the timeline and security requirements for the presidential departure. His praise for the international cooperation that had marked the entire visit was genuine, but Eleanor barely heard his words. Her attention was focused on Marcus, standing at attention beside her, and the growing realization that in just a few hours he would be gone from her life. Captain Rodriguez delivered similar remarks to the American personnel, commending their professionalism and the excellence of their performance throughout the challenging assignment. Marcus accepted the praise with appropriate humility, but his thoughts were entirely occupied with the woman standing nearby and the connection they had developed that would soon be severed by duty and geography. As the departure ceremony preparations proceeded, both Marcus and Eleanor found themselves looking for opportunities to speak privately, but the demands of their duties and the presence of other personnel made such conversations impossible. They exchanged meaningful glances and subtle gestures of support and affection, but the formal setting prevented them from addressing the feelings that both knew were growing stronger with each passing hour. The presidential party began their final preparations for departure, and the palace staff initiated the complex logistics required for the conclusion of a state visit. Vehicles were arranged, security perimeters established, and protocol officers ensured that every detail of the departure ceremony would proceed with the same precision that had marked the entire visit. Eleanor found herself assigned to coordinate the movement of security personnel during the departure sequence, a responsibility that required her to work closely with Marcus as the American and British units synchronized their activities. Their professional interaction was seamless and efficient, but both were acutely aware that these might be among the last moments they would share together. During a brief pause in the preparation activities, Marcus approached Eleanor at her coordination station. The noise and activity around them provided a small measure of privacy, though they still needed to maintain the professional demeanor required by their setting. Eleanor, Marcus said quietly, using her first name for the first time during their official duties. I need to tell you something before this ends. Eleanor felt her heart rate increase at the serious tone in his voice and the use of her given name. What is it? She replied, though she suspected she knew what he was struggling to express. Marcus looked directly into her eyes, and, in that moment, they both felt the same electric connection that had marked their first meaningful encounter during the ceremony several days earlier. These past few days have meant more to me than I know how to express, he said. Working with you, getting to know you, has been the most meaningful experience I've had in my military career. Eleanor felt tears threatening at the honest emotion in his voice, but she maintained her composure while her heart raced with the implications of his words. It's meant a great deal to me as well, she replied. More than I expected when this assignment began. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of other personnel, forcing them to return to their professional roles just as they were beginning to address the feelings that had been building between them. Marcus felt frustration at the interruption, knowing that opportunities for private conversation were becoming increasingly rare as the departure ceremony approached. The presidential party emerged from the palace for the final time, and the departure ceremony began with the same precision and pageantry that had marked every aspect of the state visit. Marcus and Eleanor took their assigned positions, maintaining their professional focus while both struggled with the knowledge that their time together was rapidly coming to an end. The ceremony proceeded through its carefully choreographed elements, with speeches, formal farewells, and the traditional presentations that marked such diplomatic occasions. Both Marcus and Eleanor performed their duties flawlessly, but their attention kept drifting to each other across the formal gathering, each stealing glances when their responsibilities permitted. As the presidential motorcade prepared for departure, the various security units began to stand down from their heightened alert status. The ceremony was concluding successfully, marking the end of a diplomatic triumph that would be remembered favorably by both nations. But for Marcus and Eleanor, the success of the mission felt overshadowed by the personal loss they were about to experience. Colonel Hartwell approached Eleanor as the ceremony wound down, his expression carrying the satisfaction of a successful mission completion. Outstanding work throughout this assignment, Guardsman Whitfield, he said. Your professionalism and competence have been exemplary. I'll be noting your performance in my report. Eleanor accepted the praise with appropriate gratitude, but her thoughts remained focused on Marcus and the conversation that had been interrupted earlier. She needed to find an opportunity to speak with him before the American delegation departed for their return journey. Captain Rodriguez delivered similar commendations to Marcus, expressing satisfaction with his performance and indicating that the assignment would have a positive impact on his career prospects. Marcus appreciated the recognition, but, like Eleanor, his primary concern was finding a way to continue their earlier conversation before it was too late. As the presidential motorcade departed and the formal elements of the ceremony concluded, the various military units began their own departure preparations. The American Marines would be returning to their regular duties, while the British Guards would resume their normal rotation schedule. The unique circumstances that had brought Marcus and Eleanor together were officially ending. Eleanor managed to catch Marcus's attention as they both moved toward their respective briefing areas. She gestured toward a quiet corridor that led away from the main flow of personnel traffic, and he understood immediately. They had perhaps minutes before their final separation, and both knew they needed to use that time to address what had developed between them. They met in the quiet corridor, away from the observation of their colleagues and superiors. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, both struggling to find words for feelings that seemed too complex and meaningful for the brief time they had remaining. Marcus, Eleanor began, her voice carrying all the emotion she had been suppressing throughout the day. I can't let you leave without telling you that these few days have changed something fundamental for me. What I've felt with you is unlike anything I've experienced before. Marcus stepped closer, their proximity creating the same intensity that had marked their encounters throughout the assignment. Eleanor, I feel the same way. This connection we have, it's real and it's important. I can't just walk away and pretend it doesn't matter. Eleanor felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as she looked at him. But what can we do? You'll return to America. I'll continue my service here. The distance, the complications, our careers. Marcus reached out and gently took her hands in his, a gesture that violated military protocol, but felt completely natural and necessary in the moment. I don't have all the answers, he said, but I know that what we have is worth fighting for. We'll find a way to make this work somehow. Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw the same determination and hope that she felt in her own heart. I want to try, she said. Whatever it takes, whatever complications we have to navigate, I want to find a way to continue this. Marcus felt a surge of relief and joy at her words. We'll start with letters, phone calls, whatever communication we can manage. And when leave time allows, we'll visit each other. This isn't ending here, Eleanor. This is just the beginning. Eleanor smiled through her tears, feeling hope replace the despair that had been building throughout the day. I'd like that very much, she said. I'd like that more than anything. They heard the approach of other personnel in the corridor, signaling that their private moment was about to end. Marcus squeezed her hands gently before releasing them, both understanding that they needed to return to their professional roles for the final departure procedures. I'll write to you as soon as I return to base, Marcus promised, and I'll find a way to stay in touch while we figure out the rest. Eleanor nodded, her heart full of emotion and possibility. I'll be waiting for that letter, she replied. And, Marcus, thank you for these few days. Thank you for showing me something I didn't know was possible. They returned to their respective duties with renewed purpose and hope, both carrying the knowledge that their connection had survived the test of impending separation and had emerged stronger than before. The departure procedures proceeded with military efficiency, but both Marcus and Eleanor now faced them with anticipation rather than despair. As Marcus boarded the transport that would take him to the airport for his return journey to the United States, he looked back at the palace one final time. Eleanor was visible in the distance, standing at attention as she resumed her regular duties, but she raised her hand in a subtle gesture of farewell that only he would recognize. Marcus returned the gesture with equal discretion, carrying with him the memory of their heart-stopping moment of connection and the promise of many more to come. The assignment that had begun as routine duty had become the foundation for something that would transform both of their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. Eleanor watched the transport disappear from view, feeling both sadness at Marcus's departure and excitement about the future they had committed to building together. The American Marine had shown her depths of feeling and possibility that she had never imagined, and she was determined to nurture and protect what they had discovered together. 3 weeks later, Eleanor received a letter postmarked from Marine Corps Base Quantico in Virginia. Marcus's words expressed all the feelings he had been unable to articulate during their brief time together, along with detailed plans for maintaining their connection across the distance that separated them. The letter was the first of many that would follow, each one strengthening their bond and building toward a future that neither had dared to imagine when they first held each other's eyes across a palace courtyard. Their love story would face many challenges in the months and years that followed, including military regulations, international complications, and the simple difficulty of maintaining a relationship across thousands of miles. But the foundation they had built during those few remarkable days in London proved strong enough to support whatever obstacles they encountered. 5 years later, Eleanor would resign her commission with the Royal Guard to marry Marcus Thompson in a ceremony attended by military personnel from both nations, including Colonel Hartwell and Captain Rodriguez, who had observed the beginning of their connection with professional discretion and personal approval. Their heart-stopping moment of eye contact had lasted only seconds, but its impact would resonate through their entire lives together, proving that sometimes the most important moments come when we least expect them, disguised as routine duty and everyday responsibility. Love, they discovered, could flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances when it found two hearts brave enough to recognize and nurture its possibilities.